Hi folks, HR Funk back after a long absence with a brand new video on one of my favorite firearms, or maybe I should say one of my favorite cartridges. I'm going to be talking today about the Smith & Wesson 44 Magnum, and that is the full name. It's actually the 44 Smith & Wesson Magnum. Most people, however, shorten it down to what we know as today, just the 44 Magnum. I brought a representative sampling of my 44 Magnum revolvers with me today, but before I start to discuss them, I thought it might be prudent to talk a little bit about the 44 Magnum cartridge itself. Here in front of the camera I now have two cartridges. The one on the left is a 44 Smith & Wesson Special. The one on the right is a 44 Magnum cartridge. Basically, in 1955, Smith & Wesson improved on its 44 Special cartridge by making it slightly longer and loading it to significantly higher pressure. And they developed a load that was capable at that time of launching a 240 grain bullet at about 1,400 feet per second out of a long-barreled revolver. In those early years, during the late 1950s and early 1960s, the 44 Magnum gained about an equal number of both supporters and detractors. The supporters were largely handgun hunters who quickly recognized the superior ballistics and superior power of the 44 Magnum gave them a much more effective hunting tool. The detractors were largely other types of handgun shooters who were not at all accustomed to the recoil that was generated by the 44 Magnum, and many of those, after shooting just a few rounds, returned relatively new revolvers, actually nearly brand new revolvers, and traded them for other firearms because they didn't want to deal with that extra recoil. Were it not for a single event, the 44 Magnum would have probably remained much the domain of handgun hunters, and been little used in the other firearms community. But that one event was so powerful that it instantly elevated the 44 Magnum to previously unknown heights of popularity. That event, the release of the 1970 movie Dirty Harry starring Clint Eastwood. In the hands of Dirty Harry, the 44 Magnum was used to vanquish bad guys in several movies, not just Dirty Harry, but there were several that followed. And because of those movies, and actually, as I understand the story, every time those movies would air on TV, there would be a boost in the sales of the 44 Magnum Smith & Wesson revolver. So powerful was that character and the firearm that he wielded and the persona that came through both the big screen and the small screen. So wisely or unwisely, after the release of Dirty Harry, the 44 Magnum became so popular that it was suddenly being used for nearly any conceivable handgun purpose. Everything from law enforcement work, defensive applications, hunting, target shooting, nearly anything, the 44 Magnum was the cartridge people wanted to use. Because of that surge in popularity, many different handgun companies were releasing different models to accommodate shooters for all of these various activities. What I'm going to do here in just a moment is start to show you a few of my revolvers and talk about the different things that they can be used for, some of their similarities, some of their differences, what they're good for, and what you might want to stay away from, all chambered for the 44 Magnum. First up is the model that started it all. The revolver that I have here is very similar to those that Smith & Wesson first turned out back in 1955. This is a Model 29-2 that was actually manufactured in 1980, and other than a few internal modifications that came along during 25 odd years of manufacture, this is very similar to the original revolvers. As you can see, it's blued, has a 6-inch barrel, has the adjustable sight, the target stocks, and these were very much Cadillac revolvers when they first came out in the 1950s and were still considered such all the way into the 1980s and beyond. This particular revolver I baby. It does not have some of the enhancements to the lock work that came along in the early 1990s to help strengthen the design. So for that reason, I tend to use this with fairly mild loads. Even so, it is a joy to shoot with medium power 44 Magnums and even 44 Specials. The 6-inch barrel gives it a good sight radius for most any type of shooting. In fact, I made one of my best ever handgun shots using this revolver. Again, very good for general shooting purpose, good for a woods gun. Even though Dirty Harry liked to use it, it's not the most concealable revolver in the world due to the large frame and also the longer barrel, the 6-inch barrel. You aren't able to conceal this or carry it quite as easily as you can some that are a little bit smaller. But otherwise, nearly anything else you could ask for a revolver, and really, other than using the full power 44 Magnum loads, anything you want to do with a revolver or that you could reasonably ask of a handgun, you can do with this revolver. I would not use it for very, very large, dangerous game, but anything from medium game on down and any other kind of general shooting duties, defensive applications, what have you, this revolver will do the trick. Shifting gears and moving forward about a decade and a half, we have my 629. This is my most used general purpose 44 Magnum handgun. I've harvested several deer with this revolver. I've also used it for nearly any other conceivable use that you could come up with for a handgun. The reason I tend to prefer this one, because of the time that it was manufactured, which was about 1992 actually, it had received all of the strengthening enhancements that were added in about 1990 to both the Model 29 and the 629 series. Oh, just a word about the model designations. In 1955, when the 44 Magnum revolver was first released, it was just called the 44 Magnum revolver. In 1957, 2 years later, Smith & Wesson re-designated all of their revolvers and gave them model designations. The 44 Magnum revolver became the Model 29, and when it was released in stainless steel, which we have here, that was known as the Model 629. As I said, this is my most used 44 Magnum revolver. It has all of the same characteristics of the blued model that I had up here before. The nice long sight radius with the 6-inch barrel. Also, that barrel length gives me good velocity on the bullet. It's a little easier to handle than the longer barreled revolvers. A little handier, a little quicker into action. I prefer it with the open sights. I use this a lot of times when I'm up walking around hunting, and I think I might have to take a quick shot. The open sights give me that ability to take a very fast shot with this revolver. With this revolver, I actually have shot 2 deer on the run. Dropped both of them with one shot. It is a very good revolver, and it is very good for that type of hunting. By the way, I don't recommend shooting running deer, and these days I try to restrict my shooting to deer that are stationary. Just too much of a chance, even when you're a good shot with a good revolver or a good firearm, of wounding a deer and having it go off somewhere where you can't find it and die. I would recommend shooting stationary deer. Don't shoot them when they're running. Because of the strengthening enhancements to the design of this revolver, I don't hesitate to shoot it with anything that's labeled 44 Magnum. The stoutest 44 Magnum loads I can find, I'll run through this revolver, and I don't have a problem with it. Some people restrict very heavy 44 Magnum loads to Ruger firearms or some others. I don't concern myself with that with this revolver. That being said, I don't run a lot of top-end loads through this. Generally, the loads that I run through this are pretty consistent with the original 44 Magnum loading. Out of this revolver, I'm pushing 240 grain bullets, typically at about 1,300 to 1,300 feet per second. For my purposes, that's powerful enough for pretty much anything I want to do with it. I've never hit a deer with a solid shot from this revolver and had it go very far at all before it drops and expires. So here again, even though it's capable of shooting even the most top-end nuclear-powered 44 Magnum loads, for my purposes, the standard 44 Magnum loading is usually powerful enough for anything I want to do. If I'm not hunting, but I'm in the woods or out walking around on trails, and I want to have a revolver with me, the one that's in front of the camera right now is very difficult to beat. This is a 629 mountain gun that was manufactured right around the year 2000. This revolver has a tapered barrel, tapered 4-inch barrel, similar to the revolvers from back in the day, even prior to the beginning of the 44 Magnum. That tapered barrel, first of all, I think looks very cool. Secondly, it makes the revolver very light, very quick handling, and just a joy to carry. If you're going to be out walking all day and you want to have a revolver with you, this one is hard to beat. It still gives you a 4-inch barrel, so you have a 4-inch sight radius if you need to take a little bit more accurate shot. So it gives you a little bit better sighting capabilities than the shorter 2.5 or 3-inch models. But even so, it still is an easy packing, easy carrying, all-day firearm. With this revolver, even though it's capable of shooting the most powerful 44 Magnum ammunition made, I tend to restrict its use to mid-range 44 Magnums and 44 Special loads. With those, it's a joy to shoot. When you start shooting the more powerful 44 Magnum loads, because of that light barrel, you get a lot of muzzle flip. Also, this is the only revolver that I notice when I shoot it with heavy loads that I get a lot of torque on the revolver. I actually feel it twisting in my hand. For that reason, and because of the fact that I'm not using this for hunting, I like to restrict it to particularly 44 special ammunition. With 44 specials, even some of the more potent 44 special ammunition, this is just a joy to shoot. The last one up today is my 3-inch Model 629. This revolver is the one that I use if for some reason I want to carry a large bore revolver concealed on my person. Because of the short 3-inch barrel, it does hide a little bit better than any of my other 44 Magnum revolvers. Now, why, you might be asking, would somebody carry one of these for defensive purposes? Years ago, there was a concern about bullets clogging up with clothing material and not expanding as they should in defensive situations. Back in those days, this was my cold weather carry firearm. My reasoning was that rather than carry something that I would have to worry about clogging up and not expanding, I would carry a firearm that shot a bullet that was big enough that whether it expanded or not, it would still cut a pretty big hole. For that reason, I would carry this in the wintertime. It was not a summertime gun. It was definitely wintertime carry underneath a heavy coat, and if I was shooting through heavy clothing, I would not have to worry about that bullet failing to expand. These days, with the advances in bullet technology, I don't worry about that quite so much anymore, and for that reason, I don't carry this revolver quite so much anymore. With full power 44 Magnum ammunition, this little revolver is a beast to shoot. You have to hold on tight when you cap off a full power 44 in this particular firearm. With 44 special ammunition and light loaded 44 Magnums, again, it's easy to shoot, it's a very accurate revolver, and it's a lot of fun. It's one that I enjoy shooting, but as I said, I really don't use it that much these days anymore. So that's enough talking about the 44s. Next up, we'll head to the range and do a little bit of shooting, which is where the real fun begins.